Eddard Stark stood in the quiet of the Red Keep's courtyard, gray eyes fixed on the spot where Ser Barristan Selmy had, only moments before, sworn his sword to the new king Joffrey Baratheon. All around them was uproar. Word had just come that King Robert Baratheon had died of his wounds, or so the whispers said, from that fateful hunting accident. Not one soul in the keep was unaware that the seeds of war were already being sown in the capital and beyond. Yet amidst all that chaos, as the white-cloaked Kingsguard formed ranks before the Iron Throne and the courtiers fled or conspired in corners, Ned stared into the uncertain future. He remembered Robert's final hours, how the king, once so full of life, had lain pale and trembling, spouting half-lucid regrets about boars and hunts and the unfulfilled dreams of youth. In those moments, Robert had grasped Ned by the hand, called him brother, and tried to recall better days. For all their differences, a bond forged in rebellion does not slip away easily. But now Robert was gone, and his widow, Cersei Lannister, had wasted no time gathering her allies, making it clear that she intended to see her son crowned king. Joffrey's claim was a tenuous one in Ned's mind, a lie built on incest, but the queen's hold was strong. Varys lurked, Littlefinger whispered. Grand Maester Pycelle turned his heavy-lidded stare upon Ned with feigned concern. No one could be trusted except perhaps Barristan Selmy, but he was a knight of the Kingsguard, sworn to serve the realm's rightful king, whomever that might be. The question gnawed at Ned. Who truly sat upon the Iron Throne by rights? He had confronted Cersei with the knowledge gleaned from the late Jon Arryn's investigations. Joffrey's true paternity, the golden-haired truth of it, so stark against Robert's black hair. But it changed nothing. The Lannisters still held the power. They had the gold of Casterly Rock, an army of swords, and the cunning that had kept their family entrenched in the highest seats of Westeros. If Ned had had more time, more allies, perhaps he might have enforced the letter naming him protector of the realm. But time was an indulgence that had slipped past him. The shock had come in the throne room, where Joffrey demanded fealty and Ned had tried to present Robert's wishes. Lord Stark had indeed drawn the short sword of logic and honor, yet Cersei's cunning overwhelmed him. The gold cloaks, bribed by Littlefinger, had turned on Ned. Rather than assert his protectorate or seize power for himself, he was left arrested, alone, and faced with charges of treason. It had all unraveled too swiftly. Joffrey, in a fit of half-childish fury, had demanded Ned's head. Sansa's screams echoed through Ned's mind. Even now, Arya had vanished, and in the confusion Lord Varys, maybe with some last vestige of decency, intervened with a sly suggestion. Perhaps Ned might avoid the fate that had consumed so many honorable men before him. Perhaps there was a way to save his daughters, if not himself. How? Ned had asked, alone in the black cells with the smell of damp straw and a single candle flickering. It seemed, for once, that Varys had no illusions to weave, nor riddles to spin. He had simply said, "Take the black," felt like a spear to his heart, that notion. To give up Winterfell, to give up his family, to watch from afar while storms brewed and houses fell. Yet it was the only way. Ned wanted to live, if only for the sake of his children, who would be safer if he publicly confessed his treason and took the black. The realm was on the brink of civil war, he could feel it, and the Lannisters would not hesitate to punish Sansa and Arya for his pride. Taking the black would let him watch from beyond the reach of King's Landing's endless intrigues, or so Varys promised. And so, with a heart heavier than he had known even at the death of his father and brother, Eddard Stark confessed before all gathered, calling himself a traitor, kneeling on the steps of Baelor September, with the hot sun glaring in his eyes and the crowds jeering. He expected to die even then. Joffrey's eyes burned maliciously from behind the comfort of his mother's presence. The boy king was barely more than a child, but cruelty was planted in him like seeds in a fertile field. Ned closed his eyes when the king gave his verdict, prepared to see Eilen Payne's sword. But Ser Barristan, with a stoic face, had insisted it was the king's mercy that Lord Stark be sent to the wall. Lord Stark would live, parted from all lands and titles, his life's blood forfeit if he broke his vow. And so the sentence was given. Eddard Stark was to join the Night's Watch. And now he stood outside, waiting to depart, a man half in shock and consumed by sorrow. Sansa wept and clung to him, apologizing for things that were not her doing, regretful of her girlish dreams of Joffrey. Arya was missing, vanished into the city, and his heart twisted in fear at the thought of leaving her unprotected. He prayed that Syrio Farrell or some merciful hand had guided her out of danger. He whispered last words into Sansa's ear, telling her to be strong, to hold fast to what was right in her heart, for all the illusions that the Lannisters might try to spin around her. Cersei stood at a distance, watching with the faintest of smug smiles, as if to say, "We've destroyed you, Wolf, and you know it." His hair was not yet shorn. He still wore the same clothes he had worn to his confession, though his cloak was traded for a black one to symbolize the vow he would soon speak at the wall. He was escorted to the city gates by a contingent of Lannister guards, gold cloaks, and a handful of strangers who would see he did not vanish on the road. Varys was not among them. The Spider rarely showed himself to the public if he could help it. Some small part of Ned clung to the idea that the man might be looking after Arya. Yet he knew better than to rely on a whisperer's mercy. There was a brief moment as they left the city, a final turn of the head, that let Ned behold King's Landing sprawling behind him, the Red Keep's proud towers, the smoke rising from the houses, the muddy, squalid streets below the power and intrigue that reigned above them. It was all drifting away, or perhaps he was the one drifting. A man with no future in that city, nor in the realm of lords and ladies. From now on, he was to be a brother of the Night's Watch, in service until his final breath. Yet his mind whirled with one question that refused to die. How could he protect his family now? Robb was left in Winterfell, along with Bran and Rickon. Sansa was a hostage of the Lannisters, Arya missing. Jon was already at the wall, though Ned prayed the boy did not see his father's humiliation as a stain upon the Stark name. And Cat, she was somewhere in the Riverlands, dealing with her own portion of heartbreak and war. The weight of House Stark pressed upon his shoulders until it almost forced him to his knees. But there was one faint ray of solace. By living, Ned could still maneuver in the only way left to him. From afar, quietly, surreptitiously, he might send messages or advice. He could uphold his vow to protect the North, if not by leading its forces, then by watching its flank. The North needed a guardian, and even if it was his son Robb who wore the mantle in public, Ned might still guide him. That would be his focus. So long as his heart still beat, he would do everything in his power to protect Winterfell and those who called it home. Varys had all but promised he would help, though Ned could trust that no farther than he could throw a warhorse. Yet the possibility lingered. Even ravens could slip from the wall unnoticed. It took many weeks to reach Castle Black, traveling under guard with a handful of other recruits. Thin boys, criminals in shackles, a stoic merchant's son undone by debt, and even a couple of rapers who looked at Ned like he was some fabled hero. They had no idea who he truly was. Not anymore. He seldom spoke. What words he had, he saved for his prayers each night. Prayers for his children and for the North. The traveling nights were cold, and the path long. Summer still held the land in its warm palm, but the closer they drew to the wall, the sharper the winds grew, as if testing them. Ned's dreams were filled with images of Robert, laughing in the courtyard at Storm's End, or ranting at the table during the quiet days when he'd had no war to fight. But the dreams turned dark, shifting to images of the dead king's face drenched in blood, or glimpses of a boar's tusks ripping flesh. Sometimes he would see the White Walkers, ill-defined shapes of ice and malice, lingering at the edges of his dream, their eyes burning blue in the darkness. Always, Ned would wake in a cold sweat, uncertain if he was trembling from the dream or the nightly chill that sank into his bones from sleeping on the hard ground. By the time the wall finally loomed in the distance, Ned felt an odd mixture of dread and relief. The massive sheet of ice that spanned horizon to horizon was more imposing than even the stories had claimed. It seemed less a defense and more a challenge to the gods themselves, a shimmering ancient statement that men refused to yield to what lay beyond. He had only seen it once before, when he was a child traveling with his father. All the memories of that day came flooding back. The crisp northern wind, the swirl of black cloaks at the gate, the awe he felt at the sheer magnitude of the wall. Now he would make his home there. They reached Castle Black's courtyard at sunset, the old fortress overshadowed by the colossal height of the ice to its rear. Jon was not there to greet them, nor any of the friends Ned knew the boy had made. Instead, Bowen Marsh, first steward, came forth along with a few black brothers. The traveling guards from King's Landing turned Ned over formally, reading from a parchment that bore the golden lion seal of House Lannister. The words of Ned's crimes, his sentence, and the special emphasis that he was not to leave the wall under any circumstance settled on the still air. Bowen Marsh accepted custody with a stiff nod, his watery eyes fixed on Ned with mingled pity and formality. Even the other men of the watch seemed uneasy, uncertain how to receive a lord so disgraced. Once the formalities were done, the Lannister men departed, and Ned stood in the cold yard. Briefly, he thought of how differently he had once imagined his final days. After his father's execution in the Mad King's court, Ned had become Lord of Winterfell. He had expected to pass that title on someday to Robb, then retire among the crypts of his ancestors in quiet rest. Now everything had changed, but he had made his choice. He was a black brother now, honor-bound, for what little his tarnished honor was worth in the eyes of the realm. The vow was a formality, but he would speak it as solemnly as if it had been demanded by the old gods themselves. Jon found him at last. A boy no more, the youth had grown taller since Ned had left Winterfell for King's Landing. His dark hair was cropped short, his gray eyes wide with shock to see his father, once Lord of Winterfell, standing there in black rags, escorted by the first steward. Jon had heard rumors, of course, but the reality struck him still. Ned saw tears threaten at the corners of Jon's eyes, though the boy tried hard to contain them. As soon as they were alone, Jon fell to his knees, a gesture of respect that pained Ned more than any threat of execution had. "Father," Jon murmured, voice trembling. I heard you confessed. I didn't know. Are you?" Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, bidding him rise. The two stood eye to eye for a moment, father and son, so similar in feature save for the youth in Jon's face. "I am here, Jon," Ned said softly. "I took the black. I had no other choice. They say you were a traitor, that you lied about Joffrey being the rightful king, but I never believed." "You must not repeat such things," Ned interrupted gently. "Not here, not anywhere. Men's lives are shaped by the truths we speak and the lies that come of them. Joffrey sits on the Iron Throne now, and I am forsworn to the Watch. Let that be enough." Jon's jaw tightened, but he swallowed and nodded, eyes cast down. "Yes, father." Ned wanted to say so much more, to tell Jon the truth of Joffrey's parentage, to share the burdens that weighed upon him. But the courtyard was no place for such confidences. Instead, he squeezed Jon's shoulder. "I want only to keep you and your siblings safe. We can speak more when we have the time." And so the new recruits were put through the usual paces. Ned, though older and more refined, joined them in hearing the words of their vow, repeated by Maester Aemon in the September. But in deference to Ned's station and age, and perhaps because of the hush that accompanied his presence, they allowed him to speak the words privately in the godswood near a small weirwood that clung stubbornly to life in the rocky northern soil. The red leaves rustled softly as he knelt, pressing a hand to the rough bark, remembering the heart tree at Winterfell. His voice was low but resolute. "Hear my words, and bear witness to my vow." The old words came naturally. He had grown up with them as the grim corner of northern tradition. Yet to speak them himself, for life, gave them a fearsome weight. "Night gathers, and now my watch begins." The vow was final, and once he spoke those words, Ned Stark was no longer a lord, no longer father of a great house, at least in the eyes of the realm. He was a brother of the Night's Watch, sworn to hold no lands, father no children, and wear no crown. His duty was here, to the wall, to the realm, to protect them against the terrors in the north. Yet, as he rose from his knees, he felt a quiet resolve that he would not, could not, forget the north. The vow might remove him from the politics of lords, but he was still Ned Stark. He would protect his home in the only ways left to him, even if it meant bending the vow or using the vow as a shield for secret messages. He would not watch the North be destroyed, either by the Lannisters or the ancient evils that stirred beyond the wall. Jon waited nearby, concern etched into his features. Maester Aemon, aged and half-blind, nodded gravely at Ned. The Black brothers in attendance inclined their heads, uncertain but reverent. To them, Ned was still a legend in a sense, the Honorable Lord Stark, now a sworn brother. Some would resent him, suspecting he had come only to save his own neck. Others might idolize him. It did not matter. He had a job to do. Bowen Marsh assigned Ned duties, supervising the armory's upkeep and occasionally training new recruits. Lord Marsh began, then corrected himself uncertainly. Ser or Eddard, we do not stand on ceremony here. You understand. Ned smiled faintly. I understand. My name is Eddard, or simply Ned if you will. I'm your brother, not your lord. Bowen Marsh nodded in relief. We're short on everything, Lord Ned. Food, coin, men, even decent leather for boots. Perhaps you can help us organize supply lines to the south. I hear you've a son who is now, well, the new Lord Stark. He might. My son is trying to hold the North together, Ned said, trying to keep his voice free of tension. I don't know what coin or supplies he can spare, but I will write to him. That is, if such letters can still pass the scrutiny of the Lannisters. Bowen Marsh looked anxious, but not unsympathetic. We'll find a way, brother. Winter is coming, after all. The words sparked a pang in Ned's chest. Yes, he said, it always is. In the days that followed, he wrote the letters. He drafted one for Robb, carefully omitting any treasonous talk. He simply explained that he was at the wall, that he was bound for life, and that he hoped Robb would remain strong as the new Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. He requested aid for the Watch if possible, and ended with a father's quiet love, telling Robb to stand firm. For Sansa, he wrote a shorter note, though he did not know if it would ever reach her in King's Landing. He urged her to be cautious and brave, to trust only the loyal. If there was a way, Varys might see it delivered. If not, then Ned's hope was that Sansa would feel his presence even from afar. For Arya, he could only pray. He had no address for her. Time passed slowly in Castle Black, measured in the changing color of the dawn and the watch rotations. The routine was punishing. Dawn muster, training with swords or crossbows for the younger recruits, chores for the stewards, ranging for the rangers, and endless maintenance of the cold, crumbling fortress. Ned, for his part, tried to keep busy. The sheer labor of existence here staved off the grief that haunted him. He found moments alone with Jon to speak, to ask about the boy's life in the Watch. Jon told him of Samwell Tarly, PYP, Gren, and the others. He spoke bitterly of Ser Alliser Thorne, who had tormented him. Ned listened closely, feeling sorrow that he had not been there for Jon earlier. Now, father and son walked the ramparts on those bitter nights, discussing the past. Sometimes Jon dared ask, "Father, is it true about Joffrey and the Lannisters?" Ned would hush him. Yes, it was true, but they could not openly speak of it. And so Jon began to see that the line between duty and honor was far less clear than the young man once thought. Their time together on the wall taught them both that the world was bigger than any one house's feud. The darkness beyond the wall was real, and as the wildlings stirred, sightings of the others became more frequent in rumors whispered by rangers. Ned took command of a few training sessions for the raw recruits, showing them the basics of swordsmanship, but he was no Ser Roderick. The years in King's Landing had left him ill at ease with a blade. He was always a better commander than a showy fighter, but he taught them discipline, the patience to wait for an opening, the importance of footwork. And the recruits listened. When Eddard Stark spoke, men paid attention, for better or worse. Not all were impressed, but enough learned from him. Even Alliser Thorne, sour-faced and resentful, kept his barbs mostly to himself. The presence of Eddard Stark, traitor or not, demanded a grudging respect. Messages came trickling from the south. Robb had called the banners, leading the North in war against the Lannisters in response to Ned's imprisonment. The word was that he had crossed the twins, outmaneuvering Tywin Lannister somehow, and had captured Jaime Lannister in a nighttime ambush near the Whispering Wood. Ned's heart clenched with pride and fear. War was upon them, and his boy was in the midst of it, forging alliances and fighting battles. Robb was named king in the North. That was a shock to Ned. The ancient crown of the kings of winter. He remembered his lessons as a boy, that the Stark kings had once ruled the North before Aegon's conquest. Now, under threat from a usurper on the Iron Throne, the North had returned to the old ways. Though he was proud, the news filled him with dread. If the North crowned Robb, the realm was truly fractured. Joffrey's throne in King's Landing, Stannis and Renly each claiming they were the rightful Baratheon heirs, Balon Greyjoy stirring in the Iron Islands, and Robb Stark proclaimed king in the North. Westeros was in for a torrent of blood. Ned wrote again to Robb, cautioning that the Lannisters were cunning foes, urging him to treat with Stannis if possible, to find a path that would protect the North above all else. But the raven that carried the letter was a Black Brothers raven, and it flew slow. By the time it reached Verun, who knew what fresh tides of war might have washed over Robb's host. Still, Ned did his best. He asked Maester Aemon for counsel. The old man, fragile and wise, gently reminded Ned that the Night's Watch must remain neutral in the wars of the realm. Ned nodded, but the old man saw the torment in his eyes. "I am no longer a lord," Ned said, "but my family fights for their lives. My vow does not banish me from caring for them." Aemon's cloudy gaze held sympathy. "Once I had to choose as you choose now. I was Aemon Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne, but I chose the Watch and let others play the game of crowns and swords. I will not judge you harshly for your worry. Love is the bane of honor, they say. Yet it can also be its most noble cause. If there is any help I can provide, I will do so quietly, Lord Stark." Ned thanked him. Aemon's mention of the Targaryens reminded him of yet another complication. Daenerys Targaryen, if the whispers were true, was alive across the narrow sea, raising dragons. Dragons. It seemed too fantastical to be believed, yet rumors persisted. Could Westeros face dragons from the east, an undead threat from the far north, and civil war in the heartland, all at once? Amidst these storms, the Wall's immediate perils demanded attention. Wildlings were gathering in greater numbers beyond the Frostfangs, rumor said, uniting under a king beyond the Wall named Mance Rayder, a deserter of the Watch. Rangers disappeared on expeditions. Corpses reanimated in the night, pale with eyes of ice. Jon had encountered such horrors along with his friends. Ned had no illusions. The others were real, just as old Nan's stories had always warned. If the Watch could not hold them back, there would be no realm to squabble over. War in the south might be dwarfed by a far more dangerous conflict in the north. The Lord Commander, Jeor Mormont, a massive bear of a man, greeted Ned warmly when he returned from arranging. Mormont, known as the Old Bear, had once served House Mormont in the north. He understood Ned's predicament. "I heard about your arrival," said Mormont, voice gruff but kindly. "No man dreams of coming here under such circumstances, but we're glad for your sword." Ned inclined his head respectfully. "I am here to do my duty, Lord Commander. I only hope it might do some good." Mormont nodded. "We're planning a great ranging beyond the Wall soon. The wildlings gather, and we need answers. If you've the courage for it, we could use your counsel." Ned didn't hesitate. "My duty is to the Watch, my lord." Jon overheard, face a mix of pride and worry. He knew Ned was no ranger, but his father was a trained soldier. The expedition promised danger, but perhaps also a chance to see the threat firsthand, to know what the Night's Watch faced. Ned took a breath, inhaling the cold air that seemed to cut into his lungs. He felt the stirring of purpose. It reminded him of the times he had ridden out to quell bandits in the north, or gone to war with Robert. Here was a clear enemy, a tangible danger, and the chance to defend something truly worth protecting, life itself. He and Jon shared a moment before the expedition set out. Jon had volunteered too, but Mormont insisted the boy remain for another duty, delivering messages between the different castles along the wall, or so it was said. Ned suspected Mormont wanted to keep Jon close, as the Lord Commander was fond of him. Jon was torn, wanting to protect his father, but also trusting Ned's skill. Ned smiled slightly at his son. "We'll see each other soon enough," Ned said. "I promise." Jon swallowed. "Just be careful, father." Ned nodded. "I will." So they set forth in a column of black cloaks and fur hoods, armed with swords and bows, and a few horses for supplies. The forest beyond the wall was ancient, thick with pine and moss, the air perpetually tinged with the scent of decay. Every snap of a branch or distant howl of a wolf set nerves on edge. They found a few deserted wildling villages, charred remains of hovels, remnants of hastily abandoned life. Mormont led from the front, flanked by Qhorin Halfhand and other seasoned rangers. Ned rode among them, quiet but observant. He was no green recruit, but the haunted atmosphere weighed on him. Something was out there, everyone could feel it. Sometimes a wind rustled branches overhead, and the men would freeze, half expecting wights or others to descend from the gloom. Still, the days passed uneventfully, if cold and taxing. They pressed on, determined to find answers or confrontation. At last, Mormont decided to split the party. Some would scout further west, others to the east. Ned joined the eastern group, under the command of a ranger named Othel Yarwick, known for his skills at tracking. Their path led them deeper into the haunted forest, where the pine trees grew dense and the ground was thick with fallen needles. It was there Ned heard the first screams of a dying man in the night. The group dashed toward the sound, torches in hand, forming a circle to see if they were under attack. They found a ranger pinned beneath a fallen trunk, leg broken, eyes wild, whispering about dead men rising. Ned felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He and another man heaved the trunk off the ranger. Othel Yarwick, scowling, turned them around, urging caution. "We need to regroup with Mormont. It's too dangerous to keep going like this. We're not properly equipped to face wights if they roam in numbers." But the return trip was no kinder. By then the creatures had found them. Corpses with pale, rotting flesh, eyes shining blue in the darkness. They appeared at the edge of the torchlight, silent as the grave. The living men formed a tight ring, brandishing steel, but as each wight advanced, sword blows that would fell a living man only slowed them. Steel alone was not enough. Fire was the key. Ned remembered the tales. They set torches to them, flailing in desperate chaos. The stench of burning hair and rotten flesh made men retch. In the panic, a few wights died again, collapsing into blackening husks, but others pressed closer. A young ranger screamed as cold hands gripped his face. Ned slashed at the arms, severing them, but they continued to twitch on the ground. It was worse than any battlefield Ned had known. At least living foes bled and died with some finality. These abominations defied reason, stirring primal fear in every man. Yet they fought on. Ned took a torch from a comrade whose sword arm was wounded and thrust it into the chest of a wight that lurched toward him. It hissed, skin crackling, stumbling back as flames licked upward. Men scrambled, shouting for one another, the ring of steel overshadowed by the roar of fire and the hiss of undead throats. When the last wight fell, the watchers were left panting, trembling. They had lost 3 men, including the ranger whose leg was broken. Othel Yarwick spat on the ground and said, "We ride for the fist of the first men, see if Lord Commander is there, and then back to Castle Black. The realm needs to hear of this." Ned nodded grimly, sweat mingling with the icy wind on his brow. He had known the threat was real, but seeing these horrors firsthand banished all doubt. The war in the south was a lesser squabble compared to what approached from beyond the wall. If these wights were mere forerunners, Ned feared for the living in all corners of Westeros. They did as Othel commanded. At the fist of the first men, Mormont was waiting with the rest, battered by their own skirmishes. Then came the return to Castle Black, a grim march carrying the wounded and the dead. They had lost many. The old bear's face was set in stony determination, as if each casualty only steeled his resolve. Ned asked him quietly, "We must warn the South. They must send men. Thousands, if need be." Mormont grunted, "Aye, but I doubt we'll see thousands. The realm is at war with itself. They'll say they have no men to spare." Ned looked away, jaw clenched. "Then the realm will bleed from both ends. If the North is consumed, what then? The winter that will follow this war will be 1,000 times more deadly." "We'll do what we can," Mormont said. "We'll send ravens. Men might ignore them or cry them false, but we'll keep sending the messages until someone listens. All we can do is hold." When they reached Castle Black, Ned took a moment's rest, battered in body and spirit. Jon was waiting anxiously, his eyes going wide when he saw the injuries and the haunted look on their faces. He helped Ned down from his horse, wanting to ask 1,000 questions, but only saying, "I'm glad you're safe, father." Ned squeezed his arm in response, remembering all too well the sight of the wights. All that same day and night, ravens flew south, each carrying the Lord Commander's call for aid, describing the threat, urging the lords and kings to unite for the sake of survival. No doubt the letters would find their way to King's Landing, to Stannis at Dragonstone, Renly in the Reach, Robb in the Riverlands, Balon on Pike, even to the Vale. Ned also composed a personal letter for Robb, adding his own entreaties, hoping that hearing it from his father's own hand might lend some weight to the warnings. The time for petty feuds needed to end, or so Ned prayed. But he knew the reality of men's hearts. War was a heady thing, and power was a seductive mistress. In the weeks that followed, the Night's Watch hunkered down in anticipation. More rangers went missing, and wildling incursions grew frequent. Occasionally, a wildling prisoner was taken. They spoke of Mance Rayder gathering all his people at some hidden refuge in the far north, preparing for something. Some wildlings, in terror of the others, actually fled south with the desperate hope of scaling or bypassing the wall. Better to risk the crow's steel than the undead's grasp. Ned watched the tension grow daily. He helped organize the defenses, working with Corran, Othel Yarwick, and others, thinking like a field commander again. If the entire wildling population came south at once, they would be unstoppable without major reinforcements. The Watch alone, even with every man pressed into service, was too small. The wall was large, but undermanned. It was then that a raven arrived from the south. Some were official replies, stiffly worded, from whichever maesters still kept to courtesy. One letter came from King's Landing, presumably the small council, stating that the crown recognized the Night's Watch's concerns but could spare no troops at present, as the realm was in crisis. Another from Stannis Baratheon's hand declared an interest in the Watch's plight, but insisted that only with the realm's recognition of Stannis as king could he consider sending forces. Renly, it seemed, was dead, murdered in suspicious circumstances, so perhaps Stannis had fewer distractions. But that was small comfort. The letter from the north, bearing Robb's seal of a direwolf, gave Ned some relief. Robb wrote that he took the threat seriously, that he would do what he could, but the war with the Lannisters demanded the bulk of his men. Lord Tywin was on the move. King Balon Greyjoy had attacked the northern coasts. The north itself was threatened. In short, the new king in the north had his own travails, though he pledged to consider sending men if he could secure peace. Ned read between the lines. Robb was being squeezed from all sides, by the Lannisters, by the Greyjoys, and by the expectations of his own bannermen. The boy was little more than 16, yet already carrying the fate of the entire North on his shoulders. As always, Ned could only be proud, though he ached to stand beside him. If only I had never gone south, Ned thought. If only I had never left Winterfell. But regrets were fruitless. He was here, and he would make the best of it. He wrote back, urging Robb to do whatever was necessary to end the war quickly. Negotiate with Stannis, parley with the Tyrells, find a path that freed the north. If Greyjoy threatened their coasts, perhaps the matter would unite the northern lords behind Robb's desire for peace on other fronts. Ned knew such advice might be naive in a time of bloodshed. Still, it was all he could offer, short of breaking his vows and leaving the wall in open defiance. That he could not do, nor would it help. He was more use as a watcher on the wall, sending warnings and acting as a moral anchor for the realm, if they would heed him. The ravens flew again, carrying letters from Mormont and from Ned. Meanwhile, Ned busied himself in training with the recruits, in forging the meager fighting force into something sharper, in teaching them discipline. Word spread among the watch that the father of the king in the north was among them, living as a humble brother, no different from the rest save for his quiet authority. Some looked up to him, others eyed him suspiciously, but his presence changed the energy at Castle Black. He brought a sense of northern pride that reminded the younger men why they took the Black in the first place. Though he seldom spoke in the common hall, the men watched him, learning from the way he carried himself. Resolute yet not arrogant. The weeks turned to months, the sky darkening earlier, the winds growing colder. The last tale of summer hung on, but the world felt on the cusp of an epical change. Jon came to Ned one morning, face set in grim lines. "Father, there's news. From the south." Ned felt his stomach tighten. "What news?" Jon swallowed. "Catelyn Stark is rumored to be traveling near the twins, seeking alliances. The phrase, 'We're not sure if they remain loyal.' And there's talk that you died. That Joffrey had you executed. Word must be confused." Ned recalled that the official story might still be that he was executed for treason, or that he had taken the Black. Perhaps rumors jumbled the truth. Rumors spread faster than ravens. "Is that all?" Jon hesitated. "There's more. They say the Lannisters took Winterfell." Ned's heart nearly stopped. "Winterfell? How could they?" Jon's brows knit. "They say it might have been Theon Greyjoy, not the Lannisters. The Greyjoy boy. Apparently he turned on us." That was a heavier blow than Ned expected. Theon, raised at Winterfell, betraying Robb? Betraying House Stark? Ned remembered the last time he had spoken with Theon at Winterfell, how proud the boy was, how he bragged of the Iron Islands. But Ned never believed Theon would be fool enough to cast aside their bond. Then again, what foolish bargains might Balon Greyjoy demand of his son? The thought that Winterfell, his ancestral seat, could be in iron-born hands stoked a fury Ned had long kept buried. "We must confirm these rumors," Ned said through gritted teeth. "We must find out the truth." Jon nodded. "I'll ask Maester Aemon to send more ravens. Perhaps we can get word from the north." Days passed and the nights felt longer. At last, a raven from White Harbor confirmed the worst. Theon Greyjoy had betrayed Robb Stark, seized Winterfell while Robb and most of the northern army were away fighting the Lannisters. Bran and Rickon were missing, presumed dead. The letter offered no further detail, only that the Ironborn hold on Winterfell had not lasted. Northern forces retook the castle, but the place was sacked, burned, and the boys were gone. Ned read the words over and over, his vision blurring with tears of rage and grief. Bran and Rickon gone, maybe dead. He prayed to the old gods that it was not so, that they had escaped somehow. Even the thought that they might be in captivity was slightly better than imagining their broken bodies in the crypts. Jon placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "I'm so sorry." The sorrow in Jon's voice was deep and genuine, for though half-brothers, Jon loved them all. Ned struggled with his composure, leaning heavily on the table where the letter lay. He breathed, forced himself to stand, forced himself not to sink into despair. "I vowed to serve the Watch," he said quietly, as if to remind himself. "I am a black brother now, but I am still a father. If there is any chance to help them." Jon nodded. "We do not leave family to die. But the vow." Ned closed his eyes. The conflict was tearing him apart. "Yes, the vow. It shall not end until my death. If I leave, if I break it, I become an oathbreaker. The Watch would hunt me as a deserter." He clenched his fists, thinking of the swirl of events in the south. "Yet my children need me." Jon's expression was grim, but resolved. "I will go in your stead if you command it. I am younger, I can slip away easier. They still see me as a steward, or as a common brother. Maybe I can find them." Ned grabbed Jon by both shoulders, shaking his head. "No, no. You'd be condemning yourself to the same fate, branded a deserter. and the realm needs you here too. If the others come, this is where you must be." The question hung between them, how to uphold two forms of duty when they conflicted. The old bear, Mormont, decided to weigh in upon learning of Ned's turmoil. He summoned Ned to his solar, the dimly lit chamber where a raven perched on a stand. Mormont was not an unfeeling man. He understood familial bonds. "You have a duty to the realm, Ned Stark," Mormont said, voice gruff but sympathetic. "But I won't deny the pain you bear. Your seat destroyed, your young ones missing. Gods be good. It's monstrous." Ned's voice was hollow. "Then you must know how torn I am." "I do," Mormont said. "In your place I would go myself. But you are sworn. The realm needs you more than ever, especially with winter coming and no sign of peace. You've proven yourself in our rangers. You're a voice of reason we can ill afford to lose. Yet, if your mind is set on leaving, I suspect the entire watch couldn't hold you." Ned breathed slowly. "I won't break my word. But if an official mission were to take me south, if the watch needed an emissary..." Mormont raised a heavy brow. "An emissary? That would require me to send you in official capacity. If the day comes we must beg face to face for help from the lords of Westeros, then so be it. But that day might come soon. If the others are moving, we need the entire realm to act. Still, traveling the south in these times is no small risk. Lannisters, Greyjoys, and worse roam those roads." "That is my path to walk," Ned said softly, a flicker of hope stirring. "If it means I might glean some news of my children, so much the better. But my vow will remain intact. I will go as a sworn brother, not a lord seeking vengeance." Mormont studied him a long moment. Then he gave a curt nod. "I will consider it once we secure Castle Black. The wildlings may be preparing to assault us from beyond the wall. We cannot lose our best men now. But if the opportunity arises to send an envoy to Winterfell or White Harbor, I'll consider you for the role. Until then, I need your sword here, Ned Stark." Ned bowed his head, a swirl of conflict in his heart. He knew he had to remain, at least for now. Brandon, Rickon, he prayed, might still be alive, though the ravens said otherwise. The rumors changed daily. Some said Theon had murdered them. Others said they were captive. Others claimed they had turned into wolves and roamed the woods. With no certainty, Ned clung to hope. As the snows began to dust the courtyard, the watch prepared for winter in earnest. The tasks were endless. Stockpiling food, seeing to fortifications, mending cloaks. Ned found himself writing messages again, urging not just Robb, but any other northern lords who might read them. "Defend your people, gather them close. The real threat is yet to come." The details he did not commit to paper, lest the letters be dismissed as ravings of an old man. But if they respected House Stark, they might heed the warning to shelter their small folk. Jon, meanwhile, was recognized as a leader among the recruits, though he was still haunted by the knowledge of his siblings' plight. He sparred with a renewed ferocity, determined to be strong enough to protect those he loved. Ned watched with quiet admiration, though sorrow gnawed at him. He had never wanted this life for Jon, never wanted the boy to face so much hardship alone. The bonds they shared as father and son grew stronger in their shared adversity. Yet Ned knew there were secrets about Jon's parentage he had carried for so long, secrets that weighed heavier now that they stood side by side in black. But no, that secret was not his alone. He had promised the dying Lyanna. Perhaps one day, if the realm was secure, he might tell Jon the truth. For now, there was too much chaos, and telling Jon would only burden him more. One morning, a new band of recruits arrived, a few desperate men, a couple from the Westerlands forced to take the Black for theft or worse, some from the Reach. Among them was a messenger who carried an urgent letter for Eddard Stark, from the Riverlands. Ned opened it carefully in the privacy of Maester Aemon's quarters. The scrawled writing was Cat's, though rushed and with tear stains. "Ned, if this reaches you, Bran and Rickon have vanished, presumed dead at Theon's hand. Yet there is no proof. The North is in chaos. I have tried to counsel Robb, but the war binds him. We are at Riverrun, besieged by the Lannisters on and off. Jaime is our prisoner, yet that has not stopped Tywin from retaliating. Sansa remains a hostage in King's Landing, though Arya is missing. The Queen Regent suggests she has Arya as well, but no one can confirm. The realm fractures further each day. If there is any help you can give, if you still have influence, I beg you, help our children. Tears blurred Ned's vision as he read. He pressed a hand to his forehead. Everything was coming undone. The rumor that Sansa might yet be in King's Landing was a small relief. She was alive, at least. But a hostage to Joffrey was worse than death in some ways. Arya's fate remained unknown. Even Cat was not sure if the Lannisters truly had her. Ned's fists tightened. Later, over a late supper of thin stew, he shared what he could with Jon. "They live," Ned said quietly. "Some, at least. Sansa is in King's Landing, a hostage. Bran and Rickon are missing, not confirmed dead. Arya is unaccounted for, though the Lannisters claim they hold her. The rest is war and sorrow." Jon's hands trembled at the mention of his siblings, though he was not truly recognized as their brother. "Could we? There must be something we can do." Ned's face was pale. "I will speak to the Lord Commander. Perhaps the time has come for me to be that envoy. If I can travel to King's Landing under the Black Banner, they might not dare harm me, at least not openly. I can negotiate for the safety of Sansa, confirm if they truly hold Arya, and rally any northern allies." Jon nodded fiercely. "I will go with you." But Ned placed a hand on Jon's arm. "No, we can't both go. The Watch still needs strong swords here, especially with the threat of the wildlings and the others. I must ask you to remain to protect the realm from this end. The day may come when the gates fail and the dead pour through. You must be ready." Jon looked down, struggling with frustration. "As you command, Father." Ned smiled sadly. "Thank you, Jon." They approached the old bear together, explaining Ned's request. Mormont regarded them with tired eyes, as if weighed down by a lifetime of burdens. The crown gave explicit instructions that Eddard Stark remain at the wall. But the crown has changed hands 3 times in half a year, so perhaps that's moot. He released a long sigh. "I'll send you, Ned, if that's your wish. But understand, it's not a jaunt. You'll be the official representative of the Night's Watch, petitioning the king, whoever that is, for aid against the true threat in the north. You'll have a small escort. If you're killed or if you desert, that's that. The Watch loses one of its best men." Ned's face was grave, but resolved. "I understand." Mormont stroked the scruff of his beard. "You'll also attempt to secure the release of your daughter. But I can't have it appear as if the Watch is meddling in the wars. Our vow is neutrality." "I will be discreet," Ned promised. "But I will do what I must." So it was settled. Plans were made. Horses were gathered, supplies packed, black cloaks readied. Ned would depart in a fortnight, leading a small band of Black brothers to King's Landing. On paper, they traveled to treat with the king and the small council, to remind them of their obligations to the Watch and the threat in the far north. Meanwhile, Ned would do all in his power to free his daughter and find out news of Arya. Perhaps he could even negotiate with Tywin Lannister for a broader peace, though the thought seemed fanciful. If it spared more bloodshed, though, Ned would swallow any pride, endure any humiliation, to see it done. The north bled enough. Jon accompanied him part way. The night before departure, they stood atop the wall, the wind howling over the icy surface. They gazed out at the endless night to the north, the faint outline of distant mountains under a moonlit sky. Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, fatherly and protective. "I go to the Viper's Nest," he murmured. "But I do so willingly, for your sister's sake. Take care, Jon. If winter truly descends, you must be ready." Jon nodded, eyes glistening. "I'll guard the wall, Father. You guard the north from afar." Ned could not help but smile, though it was tinged with sorrow. He remembered the words of House Stark. Winter is coming. They had never felt so ominous. He enclosed Jon in an embrace, the first full embrace he had offered his son in a long time, and Jon clung to him with a fierce love. For a moment, Father and son were not men of the Night's Watch, not outcasts or bound by oath, but simply family, hoping against hope that the next dawn would bring light, not darkness. At first light, Ned and his small party set forth from Castle Black. The gates groaned as they swung open, letting them pass into the wide, frozen lands of the Gift, the territory belonging to the Watch, dotted with abandoned farms. The sight of those rundown homesteads was a grim reminder that the Watch was a shadow of its former self, struggling for every crumb of support from the south. With Mormont's letters in hand, sealed with black wax, Ned would attempt to rally the realm. Their journey would be long. They would pass through Molestown, then head south across the Neck, skirting the war-torn Riverlands if possible, eventually to King's Landing. The roads would be perilous. The war was still raging. Outlaws, brigands, and roving soldiers plagued the countryside. At each watch fort or holdfast, Ned would present Mormont's letters, seek fresh horses or shelter, then continue. He carried the knowledge of the wights burned into his memory, the stories of the others, ready to recite to any who would listen. He carried the love of his children in his heart, determined to see them safe or die trying. During the first leg of the journey, Ned found himself often lost in thought, remembering the old days. When he had left Winterfell to become Robert's hand, he had believed he was doing his duty to the realm and to the king that had led him here, an exile in black, parted from his family. He had never hungered for power, only for justice and peace. Yet the realm was in chaos, and justice was in short supply. The best he could do now was to keep struggling. As he rode, he reflected that, in some strange way, the wall had freed him from the illusions of the southern court. Here was a simpler, if colder, reality. An ancient enemy threatened the living, and men must unite or perish. No cunning whisper or petty grudge would matter when the dead marched. At night, they made camp in lonely fields or near dilapidated inns. The watchfires glimmered in the darkness, and Ned stared into the flames, thinking of the wights' flaming bodies. That same fire was all that stood between them and death. He prayed to the old gods for guidance. He thought of the weirwood in the gods' wood at Winterfell, recalled the carved face that had seen him kneel so many times. Did the old gods watch him still, or had they turned their gaze away? His brothers in black offered what comfort they could, a few jokes or talk of home. Most of them had come from places far south, never having set foot in the north before their sentencing. Ned sometimes felt a distance from them. He was their senior both in years and in rank. But in the forging of adversity, new bonds formed. He found himself quietly guiding them, cautioning them when to keep their swords sheathed, teaching them how to spot ground suitable for a camp. He was too used to commanding to fully stop, though he tried to maintain a level tone, letting them make mistakes if they must. Their first true test came not from undead monstrosities, but from a band of brigands near an abandoned hamlet. The men were deserters from some southern army, looking for easy plunder, half-starved but vicious. They demanded coin or supplies. Ned's small party had little to spare, but the brigands would not relent. Blades were drawn. Ned shouted for them to hold, but the brigands charged. Steel clashed. The Black brothers were better trained, but outnumbered. A flurry of hacking swords, screams, and the tang of blood in the air. Ned fought carefully, parrying a wild strike, stepping aside to let the man's momentum carry him off balance. Then he drove his sword through the bandit's flank, feeling a jolt that traveled up his arm. Another brigand came at him with a spear. Ned sidestepped, using the flat of his blade to knock the spear aside, then slammed his pommel into the man's temple. When the dust settled, for brigands lay dead, 2 more wounded, and 1 Black brother lay still, throat cut. A few others nursed minor injuries. Ned, chest heaving, looked at the blood on his blade and felt a bitter sadness. Even men on the same side, the side of the living, were forced to spill each other's blood in these times. He wiped his sword clean and helped the wounded. They left the surviving brigands behind, scolding them to flee or starve, but with no resources to spare for mercy. That was the harsh truth of the war-torn roads. As they pressed south, they passed through the Neck, crossing the swamplands where crannogmen eyed them from hidden vantage points. In a small keep near Moat Catelyn, Ned found a lone retainer of House Reed, who recognized him instantly despite his black cloak. The retainer fell to one knee, tears in his eyes, for the Starks had been the overlords of the Reeds for centuries. Ned asked after Howland Reed, but the retainer said he had retreated into the depths of the marsh, not wishing to get embroiled in the Southern War. "If any come north, my lord, the crannogmen will fight for the Starks. We heard rumor that you were dead." Ned placed a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "I live as a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. Tell Lord Reed that the time may come soon when the North must unite again, not just against the Ironborn, but against a far greater threat." The retainer nodded solemnly. "I will bear that message." They continued on, through the persistent mists of the Neck. Eventually they came to the Riverlands, a land ravaged by battle. Burned farms, salted earth, corpses hanging from trees with signs naming them outlaws or traitors. Ned's men tried to avoid large forces, whether they flew the Lion of Lannister or the direwolf of Stark. The Black Banner should, in theory, grant them safe passage, but desperate or vicious soldiers might not respect it. One evening, they camped near a stream, only to be discovered by a patrol of northern outriders. At first, the outriders leveled spears, but when Ned stepped forward and identified himself, their jaws dropped in shock. They recognized him. They said, "My lord, how can this be? We heard you had been executed. King Robb. He'll want to see you." Ned hesitated. They were only a few days from Riverrun, and it seemed that was where Robb's host was last rumored to be. The Watchers in Black urged caution. There was no telling how the presence of Ned Stark might be seen by the camps. Still, Ned's heart yearned to see Robb again, to reassure him that he was alive, to beg him to end this war quickly and focus on the real threats. He also wanted news of his daughters, of Theon, and the Greyjoy occupation. In the end, Ned decided to let these outriders guide him to Robb's camp. Officially, he would still be the Watch's envoy, but privately he was a father who wanted to see his son. So they rode under the direwolf banner, hidden by the gloom of war-torn roads, until they reached a sprawling camp. Northern men in boiled leather and furs, grim from months of fighting, gathered around fires. Some wore the sigils of Karstark, Umber, Manderley, or Glover. Some were battered, others were newly arrived levies. Word spread quickly that Eddard Stark had returned from the dead, and men flocked to catch a glimpse. The shock on their faces would have been comical if not so tragic. They brought Ned to the largest pavilion at the center. Robb Stark emerged, taller than Ned remembered, wearing armor that did little to hide how young he was. His expression was a tempest of disbelief, hope, and confusion. When he saw his father, he stared, as if unsure he believed his own eyes. Then, in a moment, Robb's composure broke. The young king in the north sank to his knees, tears cutting paths through the dirt and fatigue on his cheeks. "Father," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Ned's heart clenched. He stepped forward, raising Robb to his feet, and pulled him into a crushing embrace. The men around them bowed their heads, some openly weeping at the sight. "My boy," Ned murmured. "I've missed you so." Robb shook against him, struggling to speak. We all thought, Joffrey put your head on a spike. They told us." "I live," Ned said gently, stroking his son's hair. "I was spared by taking the black. The Lannisters lied about my death, or allowed the rumor to spread. I don't know, but I'm here now." Robb pulled back, staring at Ned's black cloak. His voice held a proud yet desperate edge. "You're my father, rightful Lord of Winterfell. You don't have to wear that black. If you will claim your seat, all the North will rejoice. We can." Ned shook his head sadly. "I made a vow, Robb. My life belongs to the Night's Watch now, until its end. But you're here. You left the Wall." "In official capacity," Ned said. "I come as an envoy of the Lord Commander, to beg the Lords of the Realm to unite against the threat beyond the Wall. The others walk. Robb, this war with the Lannisters, It pales in comparison to what's coming. Robb's expression hardened. I believe you. We've had reports, though few. But father, we can't just stop the war, not now. Too much blood has been spilled. The Lannisters will never let us go free unless we defeat them. My lords declared me king in the north. Ned closed his eyes for a moment. I've heard. But if the north stands alone and the others come, or if the Greyjoys attack in force again or the Lannisters rally, we cannot fight them all, Robb. We need allies. We need peace if possible. Robb's young face looked so tired. I know. He clenched his fists. I've tried. The Lannisters demand fealty. Stannis demands fealty. Balon Greyjoy wants to carve up our coasts. My own men want vengeance for all the harm done to us. Is it truly a time for compromise? Ned's voice turned low and urgent. It's time for survival. I beg you, as your father and a black brother, find a way to end this. Make alliances if you must. I would rather see us allied with Stannis or even the Tyrells than see the North burn. I can go south to King's Landing, speak with the Lannisters. Robb frowned in alarm. They'll take you prisoner or kill you. You know that. Ned nodded. Perhaps, but I must try. They hold Sansa, possibly Arya. The realm is in chaos. If my presence can sway them. The conversation took them deep into the night. Robb showed Ned the map of the Riverlands with marks for Lannister forces, potential lines of retreat, and points of contention. The war was complex, with Tywin Lannister now reinforcing Harrenhal, and smaller Lannister armies harrying supply lines. Meanwhile, Walder Frey was an uncertain ally, quick to shift his loyalty if it served him. Ned listened, offering what strategic advice he could without violating the Watch's neutrality. But it was near impossible. The boundary between father and sworn brother had never felt so precarious. In the end, Ned agreed to remain in Robb's camp for a few days, to speak with the northern lords, see if any might be swayed to send men north to reinforce the Watch. He would also glean information about the southern situation before continuing on to King's Landing. Robb insisted Ned remain safe within the camp and assigned a guard. Ned tried not to bristle at the notion, but he understood the necessity. If the Lannisters realized Ned Stark truly lived, they might pay a handsome bounty for his head. Over those days, Ned was reunited with old faces. The Great John, Rickard Karstark, Galbart Glover, Roose Bolton. Many were shocked to see him alive and in black. Most expressed deep sympathy for Bran and Rickon, though gloom pervaded the camp. Arya's fate remained unknown. Some suggested Sansa was lost, a little bird in a gilded cage, a tool for the Lannisters. Ned made a point of speaking with each lord about the threat beyond the wall, urging them to send men, but found them reluctant. The war had devoured their strength, their supplies. Next year, some said. Once we win our freedom, said others. Ned tried not to lose heart. He spent what private time he could with Robb, father and son cherishing the few moments. Robb revealed more heartbreak. How Theon's betrayal cut him deeply. How the boy he considered a brother had shattered his trust. Ned grieved with him, feeling responsible in a way. Perhaps if he had handled Theon differently, or if they had not parted ways, the Iron Islands might have been kept in check. But regrets changed nothing. At the end of that short stay, Ned prepared to depart. Robb's mother, Catelyn, was there at Riverrun, and she and Ned shared a long, tearful reunion in the fortress halls. Their words were few but heavy with meaning. She implored him to stay, to help them. He gently explained his vow, how the entire realm stood in peril. She finally relented, though her eyes brimmed with unspoken pain. Bring our girls home if you can, she whispered. As for our boys, if the gods are merciful, perhaps they still live. Ned kissed her hands, promising he would do all he could. Take care of Robb. He needs you. I know, she said, wiping her eyes. He is young to bear this burden. They parted, both feeling the weight of a world unraveling around them. Ned left Riverrun with his small company of black brothers, continuing east and south, heading for the King's Road. Robb provided guides for a portion of the way, ensuring no Lannister patrols ambushed them. Then they were on their own, riding carefully through war-racked lands. The closer they drew to the capital, the more evidence they saw of King Joffrey's cruelty. Villages ravaged by gold cloaks or Lannister men, bodies left to rot as warnings. Fear hung in the air. The people they met were gaunt, hollow, double-eyed, cursing all kings alike, for war was all they knew. Ned prayed he could make a difference, though a hollow dread filled him at the thought of confronting Joffrey again, or Cersei, or any of the vipers that had once conspired to have him executed. But to save Sansa, to confirm Arya's fate, to secure help for the Watch, he would face them all. Better to die on his feet, striving to protect his children, than to live quietly in the shadows. At last, the walls of King's Landing rose on the horizon, dusty in the noonday sun. The city was as he remembered, yet changed. War had soured the place even further. The gates were guarded by twice as many gold cloaks. Refugees clogged the approach, hoping for safety behind the walls. The smell of unwashed bodies mingled with the stench of the river. Ned's black cloak drew stares. The captain of the gate eyed him suspiciously, demanding names. Ned steeled himself and stated, "I am Eddard Stark, brother of the Night's Watch, come to speak with King Joffrey in official capacity." The guard gaped, nearly dropping his spear. Whispers spread among the other guards. No doubt they recognized the name. The lord they all believed had died. Then came a rush of soldiers. Ned's company tensed, hands drifting toward swords, but Ned raised a hand to stay them. He had come openly, not to fight. The gold cloaks parted as a richly dressed knight approached. Ser Meryn Trant of the Kingsguard. Ned felt his pulse spike, remembering how this man had turned on him in the throne room. Meryn gazed at Ned with unmasked astonishment, though he tried to keep a knightly composure. "Lord, or rather Eddard Stark, we believed you. The city will be alarmed." His mouth twitched. "You are under the protection of the Night's Watch vow, are you?" Ned nodded calmly. "I come as an envoy, bearing letters from Lord Commander Mormont. I have no quarrel with the king, nor he with me, I trust." Meryn swallowed. "We'll see what the king says. Surrender your weapons. You'll be escorted to the Red Keep." Ned let out a slow breath. He had expected this. With a nod to his men, he removed his sword belt. The Black brothers followed suit, though reluctantly. The gold cloaks gathered the blades, eyeing the watchers warily. Ned suspected if the wind changed, these men would slaughter them without hesitation. But for now, they marched as if in a strange funeral procession, leading Ned Stark through the crowded streets to the Red Keep. Onlookers shouted or gasped, some with hateful curses, others with pity or confusion. Ned walked, shoulders squared, focusing on the steps ahead. He was returning to the den of lions. One misstep and all would be lost. They arrived at the Red Keep's gates, the same courtyard where Ned had once confronted Jaime Lannister after Tyrion's capture, the same walls that had borne witness to so much blood. He was led through echoing halls, past the throne room where he had knelt in confession, to the audience chamber. The doors opened, revealing King Joffrey on the Iron Throne, flanked by Cersei Lannister, the small council, and the Kingsguard in their white cloaks. Ned's heart hammered, memories flooding back. But he kept his face a mask of composure, reminding himself that he came not as a prisoner this time, but as a sworn brother. The vow was his armor. Cersei's green eyes fixed on him, narrowing in immediate suspicion. Joffrey's mouth tightened. Silence fell in the chamber. Then the boy king let out a high, brittle laugh. "So the traitor returns from the grave. My mother said it was a rumor, but here you stand. Tell me, Stark, do you plan to bend the knee again? Or shall I have your head this time for good?" Ned forced himself to remain calm. "I am not here to bend the knee or defy you, your grace. I come as an envoy of the Night's Watch. I bear letters from Lord Commander Mormont." He held out the sealed parchment. One of the Kingsguard knights stepped forward to take it. Ned continued, voice level, ignoring Joffrey's taunts. "The Watch seeks the realm's aid against a threat in the far north. A threat that endangers all, no matter who wears the crown." Cersei glided forward, taking the parchment, her expression calculating. "A threat. Are you speaking of the wildlings? Or this fable of White Walkers and wights? Does the new king in the north shiver in fear of shadows? Ned met her gaze squarely. The threat is real. We have seen them, wights, undead men who serve the others. My men and I have fought them. If the kingdom does not unite to face this, all will perish. Joffrey snorted, leaning forward. Why should I believe you, traitor? You lied once before, calling me a bastard. Cersei's eyes flashed. Joffrey. Ned did not speak of lineage, not here. He lifted his gaze to the Iron Throne. Because I have no cause to lie. I gave up my titles, my lands, my position. My only duty is to the realm. If you ignore this warning, you will have a war far greater than any fought before. Littlefinger stood to the side, hands folded. Varys hovered behind him, wearing that inscrutable smile. Grand Maester Pycelle stroked his long beard. The tension in the chamber was thick. Ned spotted Sansa in the background. His heart leapt at the sight of her, pale, drawn, but alive. She was dressed in fine southern garb, but her eyes darted to him with fearful hope. He gave the slightest nod of reassurance. Cersei read through the parchment, or pretended to. Then she handed it to Pycelle. She looked at Ned with cool disdain. Even if this letter speaks truth, the realm is at war. The North calls my son a usurper. Stannis rebels in the east. The Tyrells occupy the Reach. We cannot spare men for fables. Ned's fists tightened. They are not fables. I fought them myself. And you live to tell the tale, Joffrey said mockingly, glancing to his mother. Perhaps the dead are not so fearsome. Cersei gave a shallow smile. Or perhaps you are exceptionally lucky, Lord Stark. Regardless, the crown cannot simply dispatch armies to the far north on your word alone. Ned felt frustration rise. Then I ask only that you do not hinder others from sending help. Let the lords of the realm decide. If my word carries no weight here, perhaps the warnings will. The men of the Watch need arms, food, and reinforcements. Pycelle, slow and pompous, glanced at the parchment. Lord Commander Mormont begs men and supplies, he intoned. But the crown's coffers run low. Our men are needed to quell the rebels. Perhaps we might send a modest donation, if the Master of Coin deems it possible. His ancient head turned to Littlefinger, who wore a slight smirk. Littlefinger responded slyly, We shall see what we can do, but wars are expensive, and the War of the Five Kings shows no sign of ending. Ned's eyes flicked to Sansa again. Your Grace, your mother told me once that you would keep my daughter safe, as a ward of the crown. May I speak with her? Joffrey's lip curled. She is here. You may speak briefly, but don't you dare fill her head with treason. At that, Sansa stepped forward, trembling. Ned wanted nothing more than to rush to her, but he kept his composure, mindful of the array of armed men. In a low voice he said, Sansa, my child, are you well? She nodded stiffly, tears brimming. Yes, father. I've been well cared for. The lie was evident in her eyes, but she tried to speak bravely. Is Arya with you? His heart ached. I don't know. I was told she might be here. You've not seen her. She shook her head, biting her lip. I hoped she was with you. She glanced fearfully at Joffrey, then added in a whisper, I'm sorry. Ned raised a hand gently, words catching in his throat. You have nothing to apologize for, Sansa. We'll find Arya. For now, remember who you are. Remember your family. He gave her a meaningful look, hoping she understood. Then, turning back to Joffrey, Ned forced civility. I have done my duty to present the Watch's plea. Let me speak privately with the small council, if you wish. There is much to discuss about the threats beyond the wall. Joffrey exchanged a glance with Cersei, then waved a hand. Very well. Guards, see to it. He rose from the Iron Throne, the metal scraping, and swept from the hall with an imperious air. Cersei lingered a moment, her gaze locking on Ned, as if to warn him. Then she followed, her silken skirts rustling. Pycelle and Littlefinger led the way to the small council chambers, leaving Ned with Varys and a handful of gold cloaks behind. Varys offered a slight bow. "Lord, pardon me, Brother Stark, this way." His voice was honeyed, as always. Ned gave a curt nod, following. His black brothers were escorted to a waiting antechamber, while Ned alone was granted entrance to the high seats of power. The door closed behind him. Littlefinger leaned casually against a table. Pycelle settled into a chair, and Cersei stood by the window. Joffrey had not come, perhaps bored by matters of the realm. Cersei fixed Ned with a cold look. "Let us be frank, Stark. You have no love for us, and we have no love for you. But you are a sworn brother now, so your feudal claims to Winterfell are void. That is a small mercy. Now, what do you truly want?" Ned met her gaze. "I want to protect the realm from the others. And yes, I want to see my daughters safe. Sansa is here, a hostage. Arya's whereabouts are unknown. If you do not hold her, then who does?" Cersei lifted a brow. "We do not hold Arya. If she were in our custody, she would be here, an honored guest, just like her sister." Her smile was thin. "In truth, I suspect the girl is dead or lost in the war or fled across the narrow sea. Who knows? These are dangerous times." Ned's jaw tightened, but he did not rise to her bait. "Then if that is so, there should be no obstacle to releasing Sansa to me. Let her go north, to the safety of the Vale or her mother." Cersei gave a short, mirthless laugh. "You must be jesting. The girl is our only leash on your son, the rebel king. We will not let her go so easily." Pycelle cleared his throat ponderously. "Might we propose a compromise? If King Robb were to bend the knee." Ned slammed a hand on the table, anger flashing. "King Robb has no reason to trust you while you hold an innocent girl as hostage. And I remind you, I am here in official capacity for the Watch. The realm is more important than these petty squabbles." Cersei's smile grew icy. "Petty, you say? These squabbles decide crowns, Stark. A Targaryen once tried to burn your father alive. Another Targaryen roams across the sea with dragons, so they say. Now your son challenges the Iron Throne. The realm is in the greatest turmoil in living memory, and you think we can put that aside for children's fables?" Ned's fists clenched. "The others are no fable. Ask your father's men who guard Harrenhal if they have heard the rumors from the north. Ask the watchers on the wall who have seen corpses walk. The realm is at stake." Cersei tapped a finger on her arm, studying him. "If this threat is so dire, perhaps you should speak with Stannis too. He is rumored to be gathering men. He calls himself the rightful king. Perhaps he will believe you." Ned forced himself to calm. "I intend to speak with all who will listen. The Watch is neutral. We serve the realm. If King Joffrey will not provide men, at least release Sansa as a gesture of good faith. Show the North you truly want unity. That might open the door for peace." Littlefinger chuckled softly, drawing Ned's glare. "My dear Stark, I fear you misunderstand the game. The Lannisters do not need to woo the North with gestures of good faith when they hold a winning hand. War is war. Your daughter is a piece in that game. I doubt the Queen Regent will relinquish her so easily. Unless—" He tilted his head, feigning thoughtfulness. "Unless you have something equally valuable to offer." Ned's mind churned, but he had nothing to trade. Jaime Lannister was in Robb's custody, not his. He had no power here. He stared at Cersei, hating the helplessness. She met his stare with cool triumph, as if to say, "You are powerless, wolf, and I know it." Pycelle coughed. "Then we appear at an impasse. For the sake of courtesy, the Crown will give the Watch a modest donation. Coin to purchase supplies, perhaps a few wagon loads of grain. But no men. We cannot spare them." Ned exhaled, shoulders sagging. "So be it. I will carry that answer north. But I beg you, if winter truly falls and the others advance, do not ignore the warnings. Send what help you can, or all you have built here will fall to ruin." Cersei's gaze slid away, dismissive. "We shall do what is best for the realm. You may see your daughter briefly before you go, if you wish. Then be on your way, Stark. The Crown has no more time to waste on ghosts and ghouls." Ned turned on his heel and left without another word, fury and sorrow warring within him. He had failed to free Sansa, and no help was forthcoming. At least he had not been imprisoned or beheaded. That was something. Perhaps this was not the end. The letter from Mormont might plant a seed of caution in the small council. If the threat became undeniable, maybe they would react. But that was cold comfort. He was taken to a small garden, where he found Sansa waiting, guarded by 2 Lannister men. Her eyes were red, her posture timid. When she saw Ned, she rushed to him, almost forgetting the guards. She clung to him, sobbing quietly. "Father, oh father, take me away from here, please." Ned held her gently, cradling her head. "I can't, sweet Ling," he murmured. "I tried. They won't let you go. But you must keep your strength. They will only yield if Robb does, and your brother cannot." "Not yet." She trembled. "I'm so afraid. Joffrey he's cruel. He loves to torment me. I just want to go home." Ned's heart broke. "I know. It might not be safe in Winterfell, but you should be with your mother, your brothers. In time, we will free you." She tried to steady herself. "Arya, have you found her?" He shook his head. "No, but I'll keep looking. Stay brave. Remember who you are, who your family is. Trust no one here unless you must. I love you." She nodded, tears glistening. "I love you too, father." Then she lowered her voice, glancing at the guards. "There is talk that you were in the city dungeons after Baelor's September. That Varys was the one who helped you. Is that true?" Ned hesitated, then nodded slightly. "It is, but be wary of Varys. He serves many masters." Their time was cut short by the guards, who insisted Ned must leave. He placed a final kiss on Sansa's brow, meeting her teary gaze with a vow in his eyes. He would not abandon her. Then he left, escorted back to his men. Outside, he retrieved his sword belt, his meager possessions, and left the Red Keep for what felt like the last time. The city offered him no respite. On the streets, people screamed, starved, fought. War had driven up the price of bread, and hungry mobs prowled. Ned's black brothers closed ranks around him, mindful of pickpockets or worse. At last they reached the gate, parted crowds, and set out on the King's Road north once more. Ned reflected on the futility of his mission. He had gained only a trickle of coin, a grudging donation, and no promise of men. Sansa remained captive. Arya was nowhere to be found. The realm's squabbles showed no sign of abating. Yet he was not without hope. He had spoken to Sansa, let her know he was alive. He had reminded the Lannisters of the threat in the north, and perhaps sowed seeds of doubt in the small council. If the worst came, they might recall his warnings, and he still lived free to act. If the others marched, he would do everything in his power to rally men from all corners. There were other kings to approach, Stannis, perhaps, or even Daenerys Targaryen if rumors of her dragons were true. A terrifying notion, but desperation made strange bedfellows. He rode on, the battered realm spreading before him like a bleak tapestry. In time, he would return to the Wall, or roam the land gathering allies. If doing so made him an unorthodox member of the Night's Watch, so be it. He had sworn no crown would he wear, but the vow did not forbid him from traveling to protect the realm. The war might rage on, but the others were the real enemy, and he would not let them catch the realm unprepared. He carried the words of his house in his heart. Winter is coming, and Ned Stark, wearing black now instead of gray, would do what he had always done. Shield his family, shield the north, shield the realm, for as long as he drew breath. Time would tell if his efforts were enough, or if the kingdoms of men, too caught in their petty ambitions, would fail to unite until it was too late. But so long as Eddard Stark lived, he would not cease to fight for that unity, from afar if need be, sending ravens and riding roads, forging alliances in the shadows of an oncoming storm. He was a lone wolf now, bound to the Night's Watch, but the pack remained his family, and he would guard them. For he remembered well the adage that had guided the Starks for centuries. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. And though he was far from Winterfell, He would do everything in his power to ensure that his pack, scattered and bleeding as they were, might yet survive the long night ahead.